Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here today. This is obviously the Ojai Valley Museum. We do town talks about once a month. We haven't done one for a few months, though, because we were doing weekly art talks, so now we're back to our monthly schedule. I think you all know it's going to be Rick Bisaccia today. Then next month on August 20th, we're doing the past, present, and future of the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. I'm really interested in exactly what's up for the future, too. And then September 24th, it's wildlife in the valley. So it's the intersection of people and wildlife, and how do we impact each other. So thank you for being here. It's great to see so many people out. For the museum, it's a pretty sad day. We're lost a really important person to us yesterday. But we are so glad that you're here. We're going to learn all about trails, which is such an important part of our valley, and using the resources that we have here. And I'm just, without further ado, going to turn it over to Rick.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming. I know it's a sad day for some people, so I want to dedicate tonight's program to David Mason, who is a great historian in our valley, who passed away yesterday or last night. Are you able to turn that off for right now? Yeah. Thank you. Can everybody hear me okay? I'm not used to having a microphone, so. My wife says that my my voice is so soft that she had her hearing checked a few years ago, so I just don't know what to expect here. Well, anyway, tonight's program is it's not really about making trails. It's more about the backstory to a lot of the OVLC trails and some of the Forest Service trails that are connected to the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. So many of you have a program. Don't completely hold me to it. Like if I miss one of the lines, you don't have to say anything. I'll do my best. Well, I think most people here are familiar with the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, but in brief, the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy is a local land trust which is governed by a board of directors and supported by the community, mostly through contributions and volunteerism. And basically, land trusts all over the nation, like the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy, protect land, just plain and simple. The stated job of the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy is to protect the local views, trails, wildlife, and water, not necessarily in that order. But a big part of my job as stewardship director for the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy is to make sure that the trails are maintained that we have on our various properties. We have 11 preserves in the Ojai Valley, and we have about 4 easements of different kinds. Now, some of the easements we have are not just on land, they're on trails. So I'm gonna talk about those tonight in their turn. We accomplish a lot of what we do on our properties with volunteers. So I see several of our important trails volunteers here tonight. And without them, there is no way that we could maintain our trails in the great shape that we do and to accomplish all the things that we've accomplished. So not all of our preserves are open to the public for walking, riding bicycles, or riding horses. Some of them are specifically closed to public access. Some take special permission. Some of the preserves are definitely open to walking and heavily used. So if you use our trails and you go out on them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Our latest acquisition, which was back in 2013, opened in June of 2013, was the Valley View Preserve. So that's an almost 200-acre preserve above Shelf Road at the end of North Signal Street. So if you haven't been up there, and often I meet people who haven't been up there, it's a real community asset. So we have 3 trails up there that we built, and this is one of the stories that I'm going to tell you that illustrates what I'm talking about tonight. Is when we started looking at Valley View, like any of our preserves, it took us years to make the deals. I mean, these things just don't happen overnight, and that was the same with Valley View. So interestingly, Valley View is entirely in the city of Ojai. And if you look on a map of the city, you see the big rectangle at the northern part of the city above Shelf Road. And believe it or not, that property encompasses 7% of the city of Ojai. So that, along with the Ojai Meadows Preserve, is 9% of the city. Now, the city is not the same as the entire valley. So the city is actually not that large. So that, it makes us feel like we're pretty big landowners. But there's a lot of space up there on that Valley View Preserve. So when we started looking at it, we knew that we wanted to have some trails. And just out of curiosity to me, how many people in the room have hiked on one of the Valley View Preserve trails? So most of you have. And those of you who haven't probably know where I'm talking about, and certainly were aware of the acquisition. So my job as the land steward and trails manager was to figure out where we were going to put the trails that we have. So we have Fox Canyon Trail, we have Lucy's Trail, and we have Foothill Trail, or at least a portion of Foothill Trail. So I don't have any visuals to go with this part of my talk. The visual part is going to be on the Ocean View Trail. But Fox Canyon Trail was the trail that we felt was our most important trail. And when we started looking at it, I had to choose a site for a trailhead. Now, interestingly, back in 1985, and here's kind of where we get into more historical stuff, is there was actually a trail that went out of where near the Fox Canyon Trailhead is now, and it went up in somewhat the same manner, but in a different spot until it got to a certain point. Okay, another show of hands. Is there anybody here who goes back far enough that even remembers walking on this trail that existed for a very short time? Okay, so 2 people. So when I was researching this trail, it was almost like it was a ghost trail, and almost nobody knew about it from the past that I could find. And I went to the Forest Service because this had been a Forest Service trail. And it was built by John Boggs, who was a ranger at the time, who I'm sure many of you have heard of. Now, John often comes to these talks when they're about the forest. And I was told that, well, you can call him up, but he's never going to answer his phone. And I said, well, how can I go talk to this guy and pick his brain? And people said, okay, if you show up at McDonald's in Miramonte at 8 o'clock on Tuesday mornings, you will find him there. And I'm like, really? So I was desperate enough that I went over there and did that. And sure enough, he was there. And I sat down with him and some of his friends and had a little talk with him and tried to pick his brain. So trying to describe where the original trail route went, which had long disappeared. The reason it disappeared was because the trail was basically built in 1985. And you may remember what happened in 1985 on that hillside. Fire, the Wheeler fire. So why would that wipe out a trail? Well, what happened was it burned everything off, and then it rained, and it basically washed everything away very quickly. And the southern exposure of that mountainside there is very fragile and shaly. And so all remnants of the trail, except for I found like 15 feet of it, were completely gone. So how do you find a trail that was never there and never on a map and no one could really describe? And you guys didn't tell me that you'd been on it before. So of course I didn't know to ask. But so lo and behold, the Land Conservancy office had a large color aerial photograph of this area that had been made a couple years after the fire. And it had the trail on it, and you could see it. So we took that and transcribed it onto a topo map. And I think we probably made some copies of Google Earth images and just tried to piece it together and find it. And so we went up there, and mind you, almost everything was overgrown now, and we started piecing it together. We had one group of guys who came up who purported to be trail finders, and they were completely off. So it was really our volunteers that ended up really finding it. And and the brush was so thick up there that there were all these guacamole piles of bear poop under the brush that we would step in. And I can tell you the sound that those makes is like none other. So anyway, the first thing we had to do was find the route of this trail up there. And so actually what we did is the very first trail that we found was the part of the foothill trail that goes east-west on the preserve. So we actually started looking for that first. It was much easier, and we started working on it. And my boss at the time, the executive director, Greg Gamble, he had this idea that he wanted to have this whole thing just happen. So in other words, we would buy the property, escrow would close, and then it would just, all of a sudden, everything would be there, like magic. And so we were working in secret up there, and after we would work on the trail, we would drag brush back over the trail openings, and we were afraid that people would be able to see it from the valley, so we had to pull stuff over, and we spray painted the ends of things. So people really didn't know what was going on. And there was this whole trail system being opened on either side of these closures. So that was the first east-west opening. And then we started working on the Fox Canyon Trail. So we did the upper end, and the same thing. It was all done in secret. And then all the signage was being made at my house. And the kiosk and the office was making the interpretive signage, and other things, other cleanups were going on. So when escrow closed, we were ready to jump. And so everything started getting installed, and we had the whole thing open and going, and all the trails done except for Lucy's in 2 weeks. And people were like, wow, those people are good.
When you were working from the top of Fox Canyon, did you hike in from Cozy Dell?
No, we hiked in. Oh, very good question. What we did was, I had a friend who owned the topmost house on Foothill Road, and he allowed us to drive onto his property. And so we would park on his property, and then we would hike in to the beginning of the Foothill Trail, and then we would work on it from there. So then once escrow closed, we were more public about what we were doing. Good question, Don. So the Fox Canyon trailhead itself, if you grew up here, you knew that was a shooting range, and that shows you how undeveloped Ojai used to be. Because when I was a teenager, I would go up there with my friends and shoot off massive amounts of ordnance into the hillside, into the trailhead that I now manage, which is an interesting thing to ponder. There is so much lead in that hillside. It's probably a toxic waste dump. So anyway, when we opened the preserve, we took out everything that was in there that subsequently got closed off sometime. I think it must have been in the late 70s, because you used to just be able to go in there and shoot. Anybody here who used to go up there and shoot? Oh, of course. These two characters. You too. All right. That's possible. Very possible. So I said earlier that those the Fox Canyon Trail was a Forest Service trail, and so was Foothill. So what happened was there was a guy named George Merriweather who he had some kind of a deal with the city of Ojai where he was going to do something in exchange for giving public access across his property. Well, the fire hit, and I don't know all the details of this, it's very general, but the city supposedly reneged on their offer or something, and so he pulled his permission with the Forest Service. He had some kind of a written agreement. And then all the other landowners up there pulled their permissions on the Foothill Trail. So the Foothill Trail, even though it was a Forest Service trail, went across 3 private properties, at least the portion east of Pratt Road. And so those properties are now owned by the Mercer family, or one of the Mercer daughters, and Greg Colbert. So they have the last part of the trail stitched up on private property, and the Land Conservancy owns the rest of it. Now, portions of the Foothill Trail are U.S. Forest Service, but the Land Conservancy is in an adopt-a-trail agreement with the Forest Service, and so we take care of that trail, so that the trail is better taken care of than it was at any time in God knows how many years, because I never even knew about the Foothill Trail growing up. It seemed like it was always overgrown or something. Is that right? Pretty much? Yeah. So that is pretty much the story of the Foothill Trail and Fox Canyon. Now, one thing is there was never a name for what's Fox Canyon Trail. It was kind of loosely known as the Merriweather Trail, and we were only ever able to find one mention of the trail anywhere, and it was in the little trail guidebook that Fred Volz, the previous kind of well-known editor of the Ojai Valley News, wrote. A very short little piece, and then the local Forest Service office has a big map in their office, and I went in there and they let me look at it, and they just have a little squiggly line where the trail was. So never had a name, really. And so I was trying to think of a name for it, and so I like to name things after geographical or historical features, and found out from the county that the name of that canyon was Fox Canyon. And I believe it was also called Peary Canyon. So these are 2 local names. So the Fox family was kind of a semi-well-known family in the valley, and so the creek and the canyon was named after them. So it's a no-brainer to name it Fox Canyon Trail. A lot of people think, oh, you named it after the animal, but that's a good idea too. But it's a poetic name to have. Now, Lucy's Trail was built later. So the boss, Greg Gamble, thought that we needed a loop opportunity. So Lucy's is a pretty steep trail, and people wonder what's the significance of Lucy. So Lucy was one of the main donors of the money that bought that preserve. And so that we don't often name trails after just anybody, but the boss was so moved, and that's where that name came from. So those of you who've been on it know that Lucy's goes from Shelf Road up to Foothill, and then you can make a loop down Fox, and that's a way that people like to go. So I believe that's pretty much the story on Fox Canyon. So there are several people in the audience tonight who definitely put sweat equity into that trail. So their pictures are going to be in the presentation, so I'll show those later. Let me consult my notes here. So if you're familiar with the Valley View Preserve and the trails around there, you know about the Fuel Break Road Trail. So Fuel Break Road Trail is so named because it's kind of connected to the Fuel Break Road, which is kind of north of the Valley View Preserve. So there's like parallel trails. There's Shelf Road, Foothill, and Fuel Break Road and Fuel Break Road Trail. So Fuel Break Road is on the Forest Service, and Fuel Break Road Trail is the one that I say starts at the wall of Ole. Do people know who I'm referring to? Ole Koenig. So Ole Koenig was a local guy who came into town. He was a Danish diplomat, and he's not always thought of in the best sense around here because he came in and he built a wall across a very popular hiking trail that, in Ojai, people think a place that isn't fenced is theirs, so they just start walking across it. It's an often repeated story. So Ole wanted to develop his property like a landowner might want to do, so he erected this stone wall, and that cut off the access. So I wasn't living here at the time, but I was kind of loosely following it and knew about it because I'd hiked on that trail a couple times. So the community went into an uproar over this closure, and I see a few smiles and nods out there as though some of you lived through this time. But so an ad hoc committee was formed, and I know a couple of the people who were on it who were attorneys, and they donated their time to fighting this proposition. And so this was going to go to court, but it got kind of settled out of court, and it was a fight that went on for some time, and the end result was that the landowner agreed to deed a 10-foot wide section for a new trail, basically around the northern end of the property. So that's what happened. And so this ad hoc committee, which was not really connected to the Land Conservancy, they needed somebody of stature and ability to manage the trail. I mean, they couldn't just get a trail and then just leave it there up to its own accord. They needed to give it to somebody. The Forest Service didn't want to have anything to do with it, and so the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy was thought of because we manage trails. So this was back. I mean, this took some time to get straight. So this was around the year 2000, 2001, 2002. And so finally there was an agreement made. And this was based, by the way, on a law or provision that states that any property before 1972 that was used continually by the public for 60 years or more without anybody saying that they shouldn't be there. It's called prescriptive right of easement. Could could fight this thing. And so that was the basis for this fight. And so it's interesting. I don't know how many of you hike on that trail today, but there's a lot of activity going on up there, a lot of building and new fences going in along the trail, and it's kind of a mess right now, but I carefully monitor the situation in regards to the trail as part of my job, and make sure that things aren't being blocked and that things are going to get put back, and then we just monitor this trail to make sure it's maintained and it's cleared and it's kept open. And the public will never know this because this is not a sexy thing for us to report on. But in the last year, we had a major issue with that trail. And our boss, Brian Stark, worked very hard and successfully to keep that trail open. It was under legal threat from one of the owners who kind of went off the deep end on us. And so, that's not something you can really write about in the newspaper. It's not that interesting, and we kept it under wraps. But it's not a secret as such, but it had a successful outcome. But this shows the kind of stuff that the Land Conservancy does to protect the trails that we're entrusted with. And in this case, as you understand, we don't own the trail. We hold the easement for the trail across 3 pieces of private property. And two years ago, we were able to nail down the last piece of the easement. Although the public had been using it, going across the last of the private properties, they didn't know that at some time in the future, they could have been denied access across the whole trail, and the whole trail could have been lost to public access even though it was across the first 3 properties. So that was something we nailed down, and it was in memoriam to Boyd Drawn, for those of you who knew them. So his widow, Karen, made it possible for the public to continue walking across that, and so we got that easement. Yes?
Now, is that, we're talking about the east end of Foothill Trail, Fieldbray Trail, right?
That's correct. Yeah, you got it. So that's where it goes, continues along on the Fuel Break Road Trail going eastward, and then it merges in to the Gridley Trail, right? Okay. So we have really good relationships with our neighbors up there, but you can see as Ojai grows, and I mean this has always been so. Like there's those of you who have lived here long enough that that you used to be able to go up Foothill Trail, and that's how you would get to the lookout, for example. That the trailhead was at the end of Foothill. Well, that changed at some point. I don't know which year. I think it was in the late 70s. And then Pratt Trailhead was established off a signal, and a new trail was put in, which there is deeded access for with the Forest Service and protected. But these are the kind of things that are always under threat. Not on Land Conservancy, but for example, Caesar Road entry is under some kind of pressure right now from a landowner up there. So what's going to happen, what is happening, we don't know the whole story yet. So let's see. Well, one thing I wanted to talk about was the Land Conservancy recently has gotten more adopt-a-trail agreements with the U.S. Forest Service. So what's happening in Ojai, and it's not completely clear yet what exactly is happening, but it's clear enough to know that the Ojai district of the U.S. Forest Service is, for all intents and purposes, shutting down in Ojai, as is the Pinos district behind us. And there's only going to be, I think it's 3 remaining districts in the Los Padres National Forest. So we we've seen this coming for several months, and I was trying to figure out how the Land Conservancy could help with this, given our means and stature and capacity, because the Forest Service, with each passing month, has less and less capacity in the Ojai Valley. So which means there's nobody out there to work on the trails through the Forest Service. The Wilderness Trails Manager left, Heidi Anderson, and she went to another forest up in south or northeastern California, southeastern Oregon. And so there's a recreation officer in Ojai, and there's an assistant. And the assistant is out on a 4-month detail. But be that as it may, with the 250 miles of Forest Service trails on this district alone, there's really no capacity to take care of it. So, I mean, Land Conservancy is a very small piece of the pie for sure, but if you take the Valley View Preserve, for example, there are tie-ins to the Valley View Preserve with Forest Service trails like Gridley and Pratt and Foothill. So we adopted those sections of trails, and we adopted the trailheads, and actually we fixed the trailheads up with another project. So it's not much, but it's what we can do, and it's relevant to our mission. So if you hike on Gridley and Pratt, hopefully you've seen improvements. Yeah.
Is it also going to be an adopted trail? Is that part of the Ojai Falls agreement, or a legal thing that's just been?
I'm glad you brought that up. I'll get to that in a second. It's not exactly, but thanks for reminding me about that. Yeah, so anyway, so we went into legal agreements, and we adopted these sections of trails and these trailheads. We also adopted Matilaha Trailhead, and we're not really doing anything with it per se, but we're working to make a new trailhead there, and that's going to be much harder to do. But we adopted it so that, you know, we're sort of like putting our dibs on it. And that kind of ties in with what Dawn asked, and which also ties into the trail easement thing. So I don't know how many of you are aware of the trail issue up in Matilaha Canyon, but there has been one with a landowner up there. Same deal as with the Fuel Break Road Trail. Public used it for over 100 years, believing it was public land, and nobody told them different. All of a sudden, the landowner comes in, you know, it's his property, closes it off to the public, but never said, you can't be on my property before that. So same thing, prior to 1972, 60 years of use or more, prescriptive easement fight. And so this became adjudicated, and the landowner had to kind of play ball with the ad hoc committee, which is called CAMFO, Keep Access to Matilaha Falls Open. And this, by the way, is not on Forest Service property. So it has nothing to do with the Forest Service. It's all on private. So because of that, it's like, okay, we have a similar situation to that Fuel Break Road Trail issue. So who is the local organization that has the wherewithal, capacity, and long-standing to hold the easement? Ojai Valley Land Conservancy. So we're not building the trail, but we're going to hold the easement, and we have to sign it, and truth be told, we'll probably be keeping it up over time. So that's another example of a trail easement that we have. And then recently, I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but there's actually someone in the audience, Mr. Craig Walker, who helped us put this together, and that's our newest trails that we put into easement with the Krishnamurti Foundation of America. So this is basically a 72-acre area next to the Ojai Meadows Preserve. So for years, the public, or members of the public, would walk from the Meadows Preserve onto that property and say over to Loma Drive or Highway 33. Well, a lot of people felt funny about that because they knew they were trespassing. So Craig worked with our boss, Brian Stark, and Craig did a big interface with Krishnamurti Foundation of America, which is KFA for short, and we came to an agreement, and so we have a 5-year agreement to keep 3 main trails open on that property. And then we look after other things like homeless camps or people using weaponry or whatever it may be. The thing is that KFA had no capacity or experience in taking care of a piece of property like that. I mean, they're running this foundation, and it doesn't have a lot to do with that property per se. There was also a historic angle on this, and there's been talk that we may mutually put in this interpretive signage which tells people about the history of the property as related to Annie Besant and Krishnamurti himself, because that goes back in Ojai's history. So then these trails, which Annie Besant and Krishnamurti both valued nature and open space, it's kind of in dedication to them. So we established 3 trailhead openings. One's on Highway 33, one on Loma Drive, and one at the Ojai Meadows Preserve. How many of you have hiked on these trails since they opened? Well, this is a get out there group. That's why you came to a talk on trails, right? Because you're interested in them. So the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy had for years been interested in doing something with this parcel, either buying it or entering into an agreement, and same with the Crotona property next door. And that's a much harder nut to crack, but we're hoping that something can be developed with them over time with trails and open space. So we'll see. What time is it going to be? Well, time is moving along, isn't it? Well, I think I'm gonna get into this slideshow, and I'm gonna say a little bit about it first. So this is on the Ocean View Trail project, and the Ocean View Trail project is an epic trail project. That's how I describe it. And this project started out in 2008, and one of our board members named Larry Rose, who is the grandson of one of the people who originally built this trail in 1903, he came to me. I was newly preserve manager for OVLC, and he sort of gave this project to me as, I took it as sort of like, here's a challenge for you. And I really didn't know too much about the whole thing, but I did know a little bit about it. And so Larry and I think our boss at the time, Fred Fox, he was the ED in 2008. We went to the Forest Service, and the district ranger at that time was named John Bridgewater. So John Bridgewater was a guy who was easy to get things done with. And that's not always so with the Forest Service, because they are a bureaucracy. And, you know, that's just how bureaucracies can be. So John said, oh, I like this idea. And he says, let's explore this together. And he stuck out his hand and shook mine. And Fred Fox wrote out a kind of a loose agreement with the Forest Service, and we started exploring this thing and went out with the Forest Service and top Forest Service volunteers. For those of you who know Mickey McTighe, he went up and laid out Kennedy Ridge Trail with me and the so-called connector trail to the Camino Cielo Road. So basically, Kennedy Ridge Trail goes from the Ventura River Preserve. How many have hiked on Kennedy Ridge Trail? Pretty good amount. Yeah, I know you guys have. Anyway, so we started going up there and clearing what's called a P line on the Kennedy Ridge Trail, which is not a very wide trail. It's about so wide. Well, it depends on the definition of whomever you're talking to. So some people say it should be like that, and some people think it's like that. But we made it wide enough to get through. And so we were up there with paid Forest Service staff and a lot of volunteers from Forest Service and Land Conservancy. And we eventually got up to the Camino Cielo Road. Now, I'm leaving an important part out, is that originally you could hike out of Ojai on a Forest Service road, which is what's called an administrative road. It wasn't officially maintained as a hiking trail, but the Forest Service kept it open for a time as a fire road. And the way I've heard it, maybe you know different, is the Forest Service stopped maintaining it and therefore basically lost their access to it, and it started growing over. Public stopped using it, couldn't get up there, and now it's like pretty much impossible to get through on from Ojai. Okay, so at the time when I made this first agreement with John Bridgewater, he said, well, let's try to reopen this road. So that was the first thing we explored. So there were 5 landowners from Ojai along this road up to the Forest Service boundary. And the first landowner was really into this idea. And so they were enthusiastic about it. We were trying to figure out where to put a trailhead, which was going to be sort of near that Matilaha Hot Springs spur road that goes off, and cross the river and go up on it. But let me tell you, the biggest of the landowners, when he heard about it, he's like, I don't even want to talk about it. So we knew that the thing was dead in the water. At the same time, there had been a plan to run not so much the bike path, but the concept of the bike path, which is the Ventura River Parkway Trail, up to the dam. And the landowners along there, because they were afraid of people, rightly so, trespassing, stealing fruit, didn't want to talk about this idea. So I knew it was a sensitive subject. So Bridgewater and I went back to the drawing board, and this is where the idea was born to make a trail connection through the Ventura River Preserve up to Camino Cielo Road. And the way we could do it legally was to go across pieces of areas, because there had never been a Kennedy Ridge Trail. I mean, this was something we named and created. And it starts on the Ventura River Preserve and ends up going on to Forest Service. And so we created this plan to, have it go from Land Conservancy, and that's what worked. So we were able to do it because we were going across old bulldozer tracks and Camino Cielo Road, which had been a road. And then Camino Cielo Road goes up about 8 miles to the end of it. A lot of people look up there at that road cut, and they swear that the road goes through to Santa Barbara. In fact, there was even an article about it in the Ojai Quarterly that said milk trucks used to rattle along that road and go to Santa Barbara. And I'm like, whoa, because I know that it ends up there, right? And we've even been up there with people, and they'll argue with us. They'll go, no, it keeps going to Santa Barbara. And we're like, no, it really doesn't. It stops right here. And then from the end of that road, that's where the Ocean View Trail goes up for 6 miles. And that hits, for those of you who are familiar with the topography, hits Divide Peak off-road vehicle trail. You've probably been up there. And then, so you come off the Ocean View Trail, you hit the OHV route for about a mile or so, and then you, as a hiker anyway, you cut down what's called the Monte Arito Connector Trail, which is, trail is kind of a misnomer because it's very steep. And then that takes you to the Murrieta Saddle Road. So this may just be nonsense to some of you, but some of you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So then when you hit Murrieta Divide Road, it's 4.5 miles to Matilaha Trailhead. So this is part of the relevance of an improved trailhead is the Matilaha Falls Trail and this Camino Cielo Ocean View Trail complex. So the day is coming soon that the public will be able to hike from the Ventura River Preserve to Matilaha Canyon. In fact, there's only 3/4 of a mile of brush standing in the way of that reality.
Is it more than just a P-line trail from the end of the El Camino Cielo east to Ocean, on Ocean View?
It's pretty walkable. But coming from the other side, from the Divide Peak way, that's a little rougher. So I'm going to show you these pictures, and this will explain a lot. So this is the first time there's ever been a presentation on this project. So you guys are some important folks. You're the trial run. So if we could get this going. So the total length of this trail route, once it's through, is 21 miles from the Oso Trailhead on the Ventura River Preserve. And you know, that's a long route for most people, but there's a lot of people these days who are really into extreme stuff, and they're quite enthusiastic about this possibility. All right, so this is the view. Thank you, Dr. Jerry, for this photo. I think I saw you somewhere. So if you look across the valley and you look up, there's these really tall mountains. Oh, I have a laser pointer, don't I? Oop. Oh, how do I get rid of that? Anyway, the trail goes up in some fashion here from the Ventura River Preserve and winds its way up and goes across these mountains. And there's a peak up here called Heron Peak. And it goes around the back of Heron Peak. And that's where the trail has gotten to from this side. So another 3/4 of a mile to the west, and it hooks up with the other end. Do you guys know how to get rid of that? Yeah, that's what I thought. Anybody here who's a genius? Thank you, thank you. All right, so this is kind of a better view of it from Riverview Trailhead parking lot. I have to get used to this thing. Anyway, the trail goes up Rice Canyon and it wends its way up this hill and makes its way up to the Camino Cielo Road, which goes way out here. I know a lot of you have seen the road cut up there. So in the early days of this project, I'd run into people at Riverview Trailhead, and they'd get me to the side, and they'd say, I want to ask you about something. And I'd say, oh, okay, what? And they'd say, you see that road cut up there? And they'd say, wouldn't it be really neat to reopen that? And I'd say, well, guess what? That's what we're doing. And they'd be overjoyed about that. Anyway, I don't even know if you can see this, but this is a map of the project. So here's Oso Trailhead, goes up Kennedy, out Kennedy. This is the connector, this blue trail. So the connector is what connects Kennedy to the old Camino Cielo Road, which was built, by the way, in about 1948. And I'm not exactly sure why it was built, but at a certain point, not too long later, a big, deeply buried gas line was put in going from Taft to Ventura, supplying gas to the area. So the road could have had something to do with that. You know, it's funny with with the trails and the history of the trails around here, there's really very little known. So you'd think, oh, there must be all kinds of stuff to know, but a lot of it's supposition based on just one or two facts. And we actually know more about this whole project than a lot of them in Ojai. Like most trails, we have no idea what the history is. I even asked David Mason one time, and he didn't know a thing about Fox Canyon Trail, for example. So in any event, you see Camino Cielo Road came up here out of Ojala like this. So we don't have that marked on here. But this red line is where this blue connector trail tees into the Camino Cielo and then goes out. The gas line crosses in here, I believe. And oh, no, I'm sorry, up here. It says gas line. In any event, Camino Cielo Road keeps going out, and then it basically ends. And that's when the Ocean View Trail came up off of it and heads out to the west. So the next photo here has a larger overview. So this map is sorely out of date now, because the solid red line is what had been opened as of 2013. So now the trail continues along, and I believe it's to about here. And so this is all that's left. And so this is what came from the Divide Peak side. So this is the Monte Arito connector, goes down to the Murrieta Divide Road and then down to the trailhead, which is right about here. So that's 21 miles. What's that? The connector is open? Oh yeah, the connector is open. You mean to Camino Cielo? From the end of the blue line down to go back. Yeah, that's all open. Yeah, yeah.
Who was the person, whose idea was it, and the amazing thing of taking the tables up to those
That's a secret. Elves. Well, let me put it this way. There's a very small group of people, like 1 to 2, who have put a lot of their own personal money and time and effort and vision into doing a lot of this stuff. And it's not me. So, but, you know, that's for another day. So this is where the trail doesn't really start here. It starts lower down in Rice Canyon, but there is a trail kiosk here. So for some people, this kind of marks the beginning of the trail. So this is on Kennedy Ridge Trail, and this is on the Land Conservancy property. But you go up to the trail and then you enter into U.S. forest lands. So this is the beginning of an expedition going up to cut P line on the trail. This usually happens really early in the morning because it's often in heat conditions, and it's a darn long hike. You know, it's now 10 miles from Oso Trailhead to what's called Camp 8 on the Camino Cielo. There are 8 camps on the Camino Cielo with the tables that you talk about, which have been put in by elves. So this is hiking up Kennedy Ridge Trail or down Kennedy Ridge Trail, not sure which, but headed out. This is up on Kennedy Ridge. These are called the rocks, which are up on the very top once you top out on Kennedy Ridge. This is over to the east. There's a big rock up there. I unfortunately didn't put a photo of it in here, of these initials carved by somebody from the Lopez family. So there was an adobe at the bottom of this hill called the Lopez adobe, and it's still there, but it doesn't look like an adobe because it got built around. So that's owned now by Mike Cromer, and there's parts of the old adobe walls of the house that was, I believe it was built maybe even in the 1850s. Do you know, Tony?
No, maybe
A little before that. Yeah, and they're
the oldest house in Ojai.
oldest house in Ojai, but it doesn't look like that today. But I believe that the initials were carved, and they're very nicely done by, well, the initials are FL, and so I believe it had to be somebody from that house who looked up there, and it maybe burned off, and they probably rode their horse up there and carved their initials. So it says FL 1901. So in 1901, there was hardly anybody here. You know, that's pretty early on in the history of Ojai, except the Thatcher family was here. So this is on the connector, and those are the bluffs. So it's not really heading to the bluffs. It's wending its way up the canyon. So this is once you're on the old Camino Cielo, and this is what we call lizard back that's up there. It's a pretty prominent rock feature. So you can see the old road cut. So this is what was cut in the late 40s. This is a spot that you get to up there when you're hiking up, where it's the first time that you can look down into Matilaha Canyon and out towards the island. So this is not actually the Ocean View Trail yet, but there's a reason that it's called Camino Cielo and Ocean View Trail, is that at any given time up there, depending on where you are in certain spots, you can see all 8 Channel Islands, including Catalina. So now you can't see Catalina from this spot, but you can see about 5 of the islands from this spot. But the further up you get on this thing, because you keep going up, you see all 5. And that's pretty incredible. I mean, most of us don't even know that there's that many up there. So this is up at Camp 8 at the end of the Camino Cielo Road. And this person here that's shown, his legs really aren't that skinny. So this is at Camp 8. As you can tell, it's cold. It often has very extreme weather up there. We've been up there before, and the sun is shining and the sky is clear, and it'll start raining. And we're like, whoa, what's going on? So it gets very windy, very cold, very hot, and anything in between whenever it does. I mean, it's all over the map. So this is a view from Camp 8 towards the White Ledge Peak area. So normally you could see Channel Islands down here, and then Lake Casitas is down in here somewhere. That's another thing you can see a lot of up there. So this is at the confluence of the Ocean View Trail and Camp 8. This is the sign, the steel sign for the Ocean View Trail. So yeah, we'll get to that in its turn. There is a big tank up there, concrete tank. So this is part of the Ocean View Trail going up. Well, this is kind of a distorted photo for some reason, but this is Matilaha Canyon and the backcountry like Reyes Peak and Thorn Point and all that. So I mean, there's times you're on this trail when you're looking into the far north backcountry and you're looking at the islands and you're looking down to the valley and you're looking at Santa Paula Peak and the bluffs, and you're just, you're blown away. So that's what makes this such an epic project, besides all the work it takes. So this is continuing along with the Ocean View Trail. You can see the cut going through here, and this is headed to Heron Peak. I never even knew about Heron Peak before I got involved in this project. So this is a typical view looking down into Matilaha Canyon. You've got these stands up here of big cone spruce or big cone Douglas fir, whatever you prefer to call it. And you can hear the wind blowing through them. So, it's a pretty remote feeling up there, but you're able to hike to it and camp up there. So that's pretty cool. This is actually from the Divide Peak side, looking down into a canyon. Oh shoot. And that's Lake Casitas. I'm sorry, this photo's a little bit distorted. And Carpinteria is kind of like over in here. So this is hiking in from the Murrieta Divide, from the Matilaha Canyon side. So we went up there in November on a trip to clear P line on the trail. So there's these fantastic rock formations up there. So this is part of the Divide Peak OHV that the pulleys over here probably recognize. Do you? You recognize that? Okay. So this is on the Ocean View Trail. This is Heidi Anderson. She's the now departed to the other forest wilderness trails manager. So she was up here inspecting the project, and this is Paula Power, who was, she's been a person of interest on this, former Land Conservancy board member. And they're actually, so they're walking here, they're headed like towards Ojai. And it's hard to tell, but this is a mountainous feature called Cara Blanca, which means white face, that's the big white face that you see when you look up Matilaha Canyon. And you can even see it from Fairview Road. So like I said, great views up there. So, a lot of this trail has been heavily covered in brush. I mean, you'll go up there, and in fact, those of you who've gone up there and gone to the end of the cut, it just stops and you hit a wall of brush and you're like, well, how on earth would you ever find the trail route? Well, we have found it through various means, as that says up there. We have some phone apps, some map apps, which are not, you can't do it with one method. Like a lot of people think, oh, I'll just have my phone up there and I'm just going to find this trail route. Well, it doesn't really work like that. So this gentleman here that has a shirt on that says, I am special, he's our main navigator. And so he spends a lot of time creating these maps, blowing up topo maps, transposing Google Earth routes on them. And so So we carefully use those, the map apps when we get in trouble sometimes, and also just dead reckoning from on the ground. And we'll be on our hands and knees under there looking for the route. A couple times we've made mistakes and gone the wrong place, but most of the time we've been right on it. What's amazing to us is the incredible quality of the old trail. In the beginning I thought, oh, this thing is just going to be some old deer track up here. Well, not so. This was like a beautifully built trail with rock crib walls and wide tread, and it was done beautifully by the Forest Service.
There's a famous photograph of a guy with some horses.
We'll be getting to that.
1920, wasn't it?
1928, yeah, we'll get to that. So this is us route finding, right? So you can tell that we're in agreement as to where the trail goes, right? So there's this wall of brush, and the main navigator, he thinks it's that way, and I think it's that way, and actually it was over here. So this is a group of scouts, Boy Scouts, walking in from Divide Peak, from the Matilaha Canyon side, and you can see all the big cone Douglas fir, the great rocks up there. So this is on the Ocean View Trail. So this is also on the Ocean View Trail, and these are a couple of the trail workers walking. They're going to the west. There's Cara Blanca. The Matilaha Falls is down in here. So this is Matilaha Canyon, and the road comes up this canyon way over here, and then come in on the Ocean View Trail. But there's an old camp here called White Ledge Camp. And so that's been kind of rehabilitated, and the scouts came in and they cleared about 8 campsites in November. And we camped there. We actually worked there with this scout troop. Excuse me. So this is a burned big cone Douglas fir spruce on the Ocean View Trail. Excuse me a second. And this is some of the P-line clearing. So it's not hugely cleared wide, but as you can see, there's ribbons marking it, and loppers and hand saws. So this is taken from White Ledge Camp, and you can't really see it because the photo quality is poor, but some of the Channel Islands are out here, like San Miguel and Santa Rosa, and Carpinteria is right down here. So wherever you go up there, there's fantastic views and viewpoints. So this is in White Ledge Camp. This was the area that the Ojai Valley Land Conservancy volunteers camped. And you can see one of the old ice can stoves. And there's 2 other trail camps that are further towards Ojai from here that we uncovered. And they had stoves and old cans. And so that was really cool. And this was a very fire dangerous time of year, so we didn't have any fires. It was in November, but it was very dry and warm. Okay, so historic part here is these are some of the guys, some of the local rangers. This is a really cool photo, the original of which is in the Ojai District office here. So I went in and took the frame down from the wall and took the photo out of the frame, and lo and behold, the original photo was behind the photo that I saw, and all the different people were named on it. So I know for certain that this guy, whose name is George Bald of Bald Street, who used to live in what was called the Olive Mill at the end of the street, and this dude, Bob Clark, who became Ventura County Sheriff in 1922, He is the grandfather of our board member Larry Rose, the one who issued that challenge. So Bob Clark is a pretty well-known guy in Ojai, as was George Bald. This is, I can never remember his first name, but this is Reyes himself. Jacinto, and this is his brother. Yeah, this is these guys were all famous forest rangers in our area, and they were part of the honor guard that greeted the Great White Fleet when it came into Santa Barbara, and bearing Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt gave Bob Clark these pearl-handled pistols. So a lot of history there connected to this trail. I don't remember the names of the other guys. This was a pretty well-known guy and a former mayor of Santa Barbara. I want to say his name was Sisson. Any historians help me out? That'd be great. But he was like the main ranger in the area. So at the time, this was called the Santa Barbara National Forest. So I think this is taken a little bit later, but there's Bob Clark, and this is George Bald, and I believe that these are Bob Clark's cousins, according to Larry Rose. And okay, this is the photo you're talking about. So I believe that this is George Bald by his stature, and this guy, you can't see it, but he has a mustache. So this is a part of the old Ocean View Trail. Now, this has all been reopened, and this part was found. Nobody knew where it was. They'd seen this photo, but had no idea. So when the day this got uncovered, it was an awesome moment. And if you compared these rocks in 1928 to the rocks that are still there, they look like they're almost in exactly the same spot, because nobody messed with them, for all those years. I mean, the trail has probably been grown over for a while. So this is the other historic photo, also taken in 1928, which is maybe a quarter of a mile before the other photo. So I don't know if you can see it, but this is a little pack train, or a horse and a pack horse. So here you can see the trail. I mean, this part of the trail is not that fantastic because they're trying to get through these rocks, but other parts of the trail further on are really nicely done, like I described. Okay, so check this out. You see these rocks and how they're formed. Okay, this is today. So same rock, same trail, but that's Paula Power of the National Park Service. So the trail wends its way. You can see it here. This is where the horses were. So this is headed to White Ledge Camp. And then past that, you're going towards Ojai and Camp 8. So I'm asking you to imagine a lot. I'm sorry, but I don't have really good maps or anything. So this is a section on the volunteers who've worked up there, who've gotten up many early hours and spent many days camping up there to make this thing a reality. So one of them is Mike Gorley. So this is on Land Conservancy property, but he's been a major visionary and mover and shaker in this project. Without him, it just wouldn't be. And these jokers here, this is Rob Young. He's the guy with the eye patch back there. This is on Land Conservancy property on Chaparral Crest Trail. And this pole is used, this is another route finding device, where you get into the brush and you stick this pole up and you go, oh, there's the guy pathfinding the trail. So we use all kinds of methods. This guy here is named Gary. He's gone up with us many times. Sorry, he's not here tonight. Gary just turned 60. He just had a big party, and he's he's a really strong guy. Excuse me. This is another one of the major players, Dr. Jerry Marinook, and he's helped out a lot. He took some of the photos in this presentation. And Mike Vaughn, some of you might know, he's helped out with some pack train deliveries up there. Yep. And probably nobody knows this guy. This man's from Santa Barbara. And his name's Ray Ford. He's a outdoor writer for the Santa Barbara Independent. So he's written a couple articles about this project. And when this project gets to the point where we have to start doing environmental scoping for the Forest Service, a lot of what he knows and does is going to kick in. So I had to include him in this. And then this fellow here, Gordon Jenkins, and this fellow here, who's a local reporter who's written some things on the trail, Perry Van Houten. But Gordon, he is responsible for having cut a lot of the trail from the Murrieta Divide side to White Ledge Camp. So we can thank him for that. And this guy, Craig Carey, who was first they thought he was going to be here tonight, but that wasn't the case. He came up with the scouts on the trip in November. And his arms really are that big. And he does have a big head, but part of it's the distortion. So, so this is his Boy Scout troop from Ventura. So 35 of them with some parents and other leaders came up. I mean, they even had people in their scout uniforms with neckerchiefs and everything. And so they came up to help. Like I said, they cleared those campsites. And I'm going to have some more stuff on them a little bit later when I get into the section on water. But one interesting thing, not everybody's really into plants, but there's some really cool plants up there that are very unique to the spot. I mean, you have to consider this is all in the Ojai Valley. And there are madrone trees up there. So to some of you that may not mean anything, but madrone trees commonly grow way north of here up the coast, from British Columbia mostly to Santa Barbara. So that they're here, these are real anomalies. Similarly, are tan oaks. They grow in the same forests with the madrone. And very unusual, to say the least, to find them in the Ojai Valley. So I believe they're found up there because there's so much fog up there that it gives a lot of moisture that a lot of other plants don't get. There's a special species of ceanothus up there called wartleaf ceanothus, a very distinctive leaf, kind of a squiggly leaf with a blunt end. You don't see that in the valley. This is one of the only places it's found, is up on the Camino Cielo. And pitcher sage is something that you don't see in the Ojai Valley. So to some of you, this will be exciting. Others will just ho-hum. So water is basically our last section here as we close up. This is Craig Carey again, who's written the great hiking guide to Ventura and Santa Barbara backcountry. You may be familiar with that. So he brought in water. Most of the time you have to bring water onto this trail. It's not dependable. And he has written on there, don't drink, because he doesn't want anybody to drink it besides him, because he had to carry it in. This was on a trip in March of 2015 where the Santa Barbara Search and Rescue Team brought in several cases of water across the OHV routes up there. They came 18 miles in this moon buggy, and they came roaring in with their helmets on and unloaded this water. And a big bunch of us backpacked it into White Ledge Camp further towards Ojai along the Ocean View Trail. So this was some of the water. There was a huge pile of these water bottles, and this is in the White Ledge Camp, and this is the stove. And unfortunately, when we went up there for our November trip with the scouts, all the water had been destroyed by bears because it hadn't been protected in any way. So that kind of left the OVLC volunteers in some trouble because we didn't have any water. So we were waiting for the scouts to come in, and we knew that they were going to bring some water in because a couple weeks earlier they brought in 44 gallons of water, and they stashed it. So this is them stashing it. These are all these boys are in the 6th grade, and it's a really tough group. So if you live in Ventura and you have children or grandchildren who are of scout age, this is the troop right here. Tough bunch. So this is right above the Ocean View Trail. This is the back of White Ledge Peak. Almost probably nobody in this room has ever seen that, but very long and distinctive escarpment there. So the White Ledge Camp is, oh darn it, is out in here. So the trail continues along here and goes out this way towards Ojai. So this is these are some of the gallons of water that we've had brought in on horseback and carried in by human power. And we figured out that we need to have big bear-proof tubes, which we carried in. And those were invented by one of our group as an answer to this predation by the bears and by humans, because there were trail runners coming up there. We ran into this woman one day, and she told me, she said, you know, it's a wonderful thing that they provide water for you up there. So we had many gallons of water disappear, and so now these are locked, and we warn people that they need to bring up a gallon of water a day per person of their own, or they have no business coming up. So luckily we haven't had any more trouble. Okay, so this is what Don was talking about. This is the 1,400 gallon spring box that was built around the time of the road. So we built this lid out of 2-inch redwood planking and cleaned out this thing, which was quite a job. So 1,400 gallons worth of soil. And this is the overflow pipe. And this is what it looked like this winter. This was the first time we ever saw it running, and boy did it run. I mean, it was just running gangbusters. You can see the water pouring out of here. Now we took the lid off, and we filled a lot of our empties that we had, and we stored those. So we filled a lot of water bottles for future trips. So this water, it all percolated out of there. But we put in new plumbing in this thing, which is a hose bib at the bottom and piping, and so when it works, it really works. And we marvel at those who came before us, but we have no idea what they were thinking, really. And this is near the end. This is Camp 8 again, and this is a couple of our stellar volunteers pointing on the Ocean View Trail towards Heron Peak. So as of this date, the trail has switchbacked up this thing, and it's right here. So it's going to go around the back, drop down the slope, and hook in with the other side. So that's the end of that, and that's the end of my talk. So if any of you have any questions and you want to stick around, please do so. And the rest of you, please enjoy the rest of your day, and thanks so much for coming.